Hello, viewers. As we continue to ride the wave of the pandemic, one of the most common places many lawyers find themselves practicing online is through remote depositions. My guest today, Tim Tryniecki, recently wrote an article for Law 360 establishing 5 imperatives of attorneys appearing for remote fact witness depositions. I'll put a link to his article in the description of this video. It's a great read for anybody, but it's definitely required reading if you're just getting ready for your first Zoom deposition. Tim, thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me, Matt. I appreciate it.
I can't tell from your article, so let me just ask you right off the bat. Are you the type of lawyer who prefers remote depositions, or are you itching to get back into the conference room?
You know, I have come to appreciate remote depositions, but all else being equal, I would like to be back in the conference room. I don't feel at this point that my ability to take a good deposition has been impeded, but I do think there are things in terms of the impression of the witness, your interactions with opposing counsel, using exhibits, things like that that I alluded to in the article that really there's just no substitute for being, even if you're 6 feet away, being in the same room as the other folks.
The first point your article establishes is to make sure that you know the rules in your jurisdiction about remote depositions. One of the things that I find most frustrating about practicing in this world is the lack of that type of judicial guidance. How universal do you find those rules of procedure to be?
So the short answer is not very, but as somebody who practices in the area of products liability, toxic torts, a lot of the jurisdictions I practice in have very large dockets where there will be a specialized judge assigned to them, and they oftentimes will have orders that specifically address how they want these things to go. So I've been a little lucky in the sense that a lot of the cases I handle in Illinois and Missouri, some in New York, some in California to a lesser extent, the local judges will have administrative orders. They'll update them periodically, but they will generally lay out things like who can be in the room, whether or not, at this stage, vaccination is a requirement, whether it has to be virtual only, or you can elect to do one or the other or both. We're seeing more of that. And I've seen some of them even at the beginning of the pandemic, but they've evolved. Now, having said that, there are still places where you will see the judges be very deferential to state level regulators or even the federal government. And that's where it gets more complicated because there's just such a web of things in play and everybody's kind of guessing. And inevitably, as happens in litigation, people won't always see eye to eye.
Your article talks about pre-deposition exchange of documents, which is obviously one of the most commonly discussed aspects of remote depositions. Yeah. What is your favorite technique for balancing efficient proceedings with maintaining that element of surprise when it comes to deposition documents?
Sure. So if I have something that's really substantive that I think is going to either be contentious or present new information in the case to some degree. And I do, for lack of a better term, want to have, sort of an element of surprise or make the witness and his counsel have to think on their feet a little bit, then I may indicate that I have additional exhibits, but I probably won't send that in substance in advance. But I do invariably send the notice, any local administrative orders governing the deposition, things that I would characterize as procedural or technical, as they're going to have to be part of the record and it's going to waste time at the beginning of the deposition. And there's nothing in there that opposing counsel or the court reporting company or anybody else shouldn't already be aware of. So the administrative things like that, bookkeeping, for lack of a better term, I think that's kind of a layup in terms of exchanging that in advance. It becomes a judgment call depending on the type of case you're litigating and the type of document you're talking about, whether you want to exchange more substantive things, because that can be fraught in any case, right? Even in a live deposition, if there's issues of privilege or foundation or things like that with the document. So that's really a judgment call, and I would hate to give overarching advice. I do think, as much as it sounds like a cop-out, every attorney really has to evaluate that on a document by document basis and kind of weigh the the cost and benefits of showing your hand a little bit on certain things, with the understanding that there are going to be a lot of other exhibits where you can exchange it beforehand and it won't be an issue. So you can create as much efficiency as you can that way, and then reserve what you need to reserve for strategic reasons.
And what's your strategy? What's your favorite strategy for those gotcha documents? You just put them up on the screen with screen share?
Yeah, depending on the platform, whether it's Zoom or something that the court reporting company in that jurisdiction is using, we'll put them up via screen share. I may, off the record, before going into the document, at that point in time, advise kind of in a general sense, opposing counsel and the court reporter, hey, I have this document. I'm going to ask him some questions about it. I'm going to lay the foundation. I'm going to introduce it. I'll get the court reporter and the videographer's take on how to most efficiently introduce it and use the technology so that it doesn't delay the proceeding. I'll confirm that everyone can see it. And by talking about it a little bit off the record beforehand on the day of the deposition, you can also then say, hey, I'll email you a copy of it, or the court reporter has a copy of it if the witness needs to see it, in front of himself. So the logistical issue can be addressed a little bit the day of the deposition. And that's kind of a middle ground between the total element of surprise where we're on the record and I foist something on you and there aren't enough copies and everybody's flustered, versus giving it to you a week in advance and now the cat's out of the bag on whatever it is.
As far as technology is concerned, your article encourages the practice of hiring an IT person to facilitate the deposition and be on call during the proceeding. Have remote depositions brought us cost savings through decreased travel only to cost us more in IT personnel?
Yeah, that's a great question. We have a fairly large IT department. We have 120 plus lawyers in our firm, and there's been a lot of shuffling and some additions, some subtractions. I do think a lot of firms by necessity have had to beef up their IT department as a result of this. Now, for us, our firm in the average week, just in our office alone, which is one of 15 locations, we'll have 30 depositions. So if all or most of those used to be travel and now none of them effectively are, that's a lot of savings. To crunch the numbers and say how many IT salaries that is, I would be fascinated to see that. I can't say that I've done it, but you raise a good point, which is that a lot of clients and insurance companies and whatever side you're on, whoever you deal with in litigation, people have started to see virtual proceedings as a cost-saving opportunity. And I think that's something that you can sell to them too, provided that the level of advocacy isn't negatively impacted. But there, especially with lay witnesses, as opposed to experienced experts and attorneys, there's a lot of training and coaching that needs to happen with, hey, can I hear you? Can I see you? What do you have in your hand? Or, is your battery going to die? It's all stuff that seems simple enough if you grew up using technology like we did and have been dealing with this as litigators for going on 2 years. But for somebody who's never had their deposition taken, I really do think you have to have somebody, even if they're not quote unquote on call, who can prep the witness in advance. I'll put it that way. And then you as the attorney have to be able to kind of fill in the blanks and help them on the fly too. Because I'm cognizant that a lot of people, sole practitioners, even smaller firms, may not have 2 or 3 or even one full-time IT person. So lawyers really have to be as well-versed in this as anyone. And that's kind of a big part of what I was driving at there too.
All right. My last question asks you to put on a creative thinking hat. Okay. I'm amazed by how much has been accomplished with Zoom 1.0 technology. Essentially, the Zoom tool that we're all using right now, it wasn't designed for any of this. And yet we've got Zoom School, we've got Zoom Court, and we've got all sorts of other adaptations of this Zoom technology. So my question is, if you could share an idea with the research and development team at Zoom, what would it be? If they could grant you just one wish to make Zoom better for depositions, what would you want?
When the pandemic first started, I would have said that 45-minute time limit for the unlicensed people is irritating to me. But at this point, I think we've all bought the full version. So what I'll say that just comes to mind for me is I think having different options in terms of the view of the witness, the court reporter, plaintiff's lawyer, defense lawyers, as opposed to just that binary choice between the speaker only and then this gallery of 30, sometimes just blank screens or initials or names. I think visually it could be presented in a way that's more reflective of the way these proceedings actually look in person. That could be a personal preference thing. I'm just a very visual person. Beyond that, I think we do still continue to have glitches in terms of the speed and the sound and the video feed. And I'm cognizant of the fact that a lot of that can be on our end or the witness's end. That's not necessarily Zoom's fault, but I would hope that just in addition to making it generally more user-friendly from a visual standpoint, that they'll continue to work out the kinks and continue to develop and design the newer versions with the fact in mind that this isn't just for like conference calls anymore, that there are actual full-length legal proceedings that are binding on people that are occurring over this platform. And I think that's why you have seen some court reporting and videography companies trying to develop their own equivalent, because Zoom, as useful as it's been, and thank God for it, was not designed really with any of this in mind. So there are probably 100 other things that other attorneys could add to that. But for me, when I look at Zoom, I see a really great tool, but something that is not litigation specific. And I'd love to see a version of it that is.
All right. The article is When and How to Depose Fact Witnesses Remotely in 2022. Tim Tryniecki, thanks for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it, Matt.